The American homeowner walks across the backyard, surveys the raised beds, and assumes the earth beneath his boots is neutral, passive, inert, waiting to receive seed. The camera holds on soil. A close-up. Still. Dark. Granular. Utterly silent. And inside that silence, a documented industrial catastrophe is operating at the cellular level. The EPA estimates that 38 million American homes sit on land with detectable lead concentrations above 400 parts per million, the federal hazard threshold. We are not talking about Superfund sites, old house paint, leaded gasoline exhaust deposited across 60 years of street traffic, corroded plumbing leachate, legacy pesticide chemistry from the organo-lead era. All of it has migrated downward into the soil matrix your carrots and leafy greens are actively pulling from. The trap is biological and silent. Your vegetables do not taste like metal. Your kidneys do not ache the morning after a salad. The accumulation is chronic, subclinical, and cumulative. It does not announce itself. Cadmium lodges in proximal renal tubule cells. Lead competes directly with calcium in neurological and skeletal pathways. In 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl facility detonated, scattering radioactive ionic contaminants across 150,000 square kilometers of Eastern European agricultural land. 1986, Chernobyl explosion. The contamination profile was structurally identical to what sits beneath your quarter acre right now. In the cooling ponds near Pripyat, Ukraine, field botanists deployed a $3 solution that extracted radioactive cesium and strontium from water at concentration ratios 8,000 times higher than the surrounding contaminated medium. Chernobyl exclusion zone. That solution was not a chemical. It was not a machine. Licensed contractor billing $500 per ton of excavated earth. It was a plant. A common, unremarkable plant, costing $3 per pound of seed. This botanical protocol, phytoextraction, uses root pressure, rhizosphere chelation chemistry, and transpiration-driven xylem flow to pull ionic metal contaminants out of your soil matrix and sequester them in harvestable above-ground biomass. The physics are exact. The results are documented. The industrial assumption that store-bought seed dropped into backyard dirt produces clean food is the central mechanical fiction this episode dismantles. Completely. With data. There exists a validated botanical protocol, executable for $3, that systematically extracts lead, cadmium, and heavy metals from your soil using nothing but root pressure, transpiration physics, and plant biochemistry. The question is not whether it works. The question is why no one told you. Here is the operative mechanism. Inside a 1 to 3 millimeter zone surrounding every root hair, a zone called the rhizosphere, root exudates secrete malic acid, citric acid, and oxalic acid directly into the surrounding mineral matrix. Those organic acids do one precise thing. They lower local pH and bind to metal cations, cadmium, arsenic, ionic copper, converting locked, insoluble compounds into dissolved ionic forms that the root membrane can absorb. Chelation, executed at zero cost by living tissue. From that rhizosphere, the dissolved metal ions enter root cortex cells, pass through the endodermis, cross the Casparian strip, a watertight belt of suberin, and enter the xylem vessels. Then, transpiration takes over. Leaf surfaces evaporate water. The column pulls upward. Metal ions ride that column into stems, petioles, and leaf tissue. Brassica juncea, brown mustard, concentrates heavy metal ions in shoot tissue at levels between 100 and 1,000 times higher than a non-accumulating species, growing in identical conditions. That ratio is the entire engineering advantage. In 1994 and 1995, field engineers working at the contaminated cooling pond near Pripyat, Ukraine, deployed Helianthus annus on floating rafts anchored in radioactive water. Within 6 weeks, cesium-137 concentration in harvested biomass measured 8,000 times higher than the surrounding water column. Pripyat, Ukraine. Simultaneously, agricultural researchers in Belarus and Ukraine were cycling brassica crops through contaminated fields, establishing the sequential harvest protocols that are now standard phyto-extraction procedure. 1995 Belarus field trials. At a 400 square foot garden scale, one extraction cycle, realistically, removes 15 to 40 grams of total heavy metal mass sequestered. In harvestable biomass, no machinery, no licensed contractors, no chemical inputs beyond a pH amendment costing under $4. The critical harvest window is narrow, early to mid-flowering stage, when the first bud clusters form but petals remain closed. After petal opening, the organism redirects metabolic energy towards seed production, and metal concentrations in shoot tissue begin to dilute. Miss that window, and you have harvested a fraction of the extraction potential. 3 operational variables determine the outcome. First, pH, target range 5.5 to 6.5, the ionic solubility window where cadmium and heavy metal cations remain accessible to root membrane transport proteins. Second, moisture at consistent field capacity. Third, harvest before senescence. 3 levers, all physical, all free. Tell me in the comments, did your grandfather ever rotate a bitter-smelling mustard or turnip crop through ground that had stopped producing well? Because what he was observing, without the vocabulary, was chelation chemistry resetting the mineral matrix. Write it below. 3 sequential cycles over 2 growing seasons measurably reduce heavy metal concentration in the top 30 centimeters of the mineral. Matrix. Documented to fall below the EPA hazard threshold of 400 parts per million without excavation, without contractors, and without a single permit. The conventional remediation industry, soil washing, thermal desorption, certified excavation and disposal, operates at $250 to $500 per ton of contaminated material removed. A residential abatement project averages $15,000 to $40,000. The botanical alternative generates no contractor fees. That asymmetry is not accidental. The physics are not in question. The data from Pripyat, from 3 Mile Island, from peer-reviewed brassica field trials, all of it converges on one mechanical conclusion. But the economic forces that quarantined this protocol inside regulatory dead-end classifications for 40 years are a separate engineering problem entirely. And that story is considerably darker. In 1980, the United States Congress passed CERCLA, the Superfund Act. 1980, CERCLA, enacted that single legislative event, did not merely fund cleanup operations. It architecturally mandated which technologies were legally permissible for soil remediation on American land. The approved technology list required licensed contractors, certified haulers, permitted disposal facilities, and heavy excavation machinery. No seed, no plant, no botanical cycle. The regulatory architecture was not neutral. It was capitalized. The EPA's own cost documentation placed excavation and landfill disposal at $250 to $500 per ton. A single residential project averaged $15,000 to $40,000, paid entirely to licensed industrial service providers. No seed generates a contractor fee. That is the entire equation. Phytoremediation appeared in peer-reviewed botanical literature as early as 1977. By the mid-1990s, USDA and EPA researchers at test sites across Washington State and New Jersey had formally validated phytoextraction protocols using Brassica juncea. The EPA even published technical resource documents on the subject. The science was never in dispute. Instead, phytoremediation was assigned the regulatory classification of emerging technology, a designation meaning it could not generate a certified cleanup endpoint under any state environmental agency framework. That classification was never formally resolved for residential application. Not in 1995. Not in 2005. Not today. The remediation trade associations lobbying against botanical endpoint certification were concentrated primarily along the Washington, D.C. corridor and in the industrial corridor of northern New Jersey, the same geography that houses the largest certified soil disposal facilities on the eastern seaboard. Washington, D.C. to northern New Jersey. Simultaneously, the agricultural fertilizer sector, a market exceeding $185 billion globally by 2020, was structurally dependent on the premise that soil chemistry is beyond the management capacity of an individual landowner. A gardener who plants brown mustard at $3 per pound and understands glucosinolate. Biofumigation needs fewer purchased amendments, fewer bags, fewer vendors. The knowledge existed. The economic incentive to distribute it did not. Tell me in the comments, what is your county charging for a certified soil abatement permit right now? Today, an American homeowner with documented cadmium accumulation in their backyard plot cannot legally certify remediation completion. Using a $3 packet of seed and 3 growing cycles, regardless of laboratory confirmation of reduced concentrations. Only excavation qualifies. Only the contractor gets paid. Only the hauler gets the invoice. This is not suppression by denial. It is suppression by architecture. The science was published. The data was sound. The regulatory door was simply never opened, and the industry that profited from the closed door funded no one to open it. The darker story is not the contamination. It is who built the labyrinth around the cure, and why the sunflower barges deployed at Chernobyl never made it to a single American suburb. The barges were real. Wooden platforms anchored in the cooling pond directly adjacent to reactor number 4. 1994 sunflower barge deployment. Phytotech Incorporated, operating alongside Rutgers University researchers, loaded those platforms with Helianthus annus, common sunflowers, and let the roots hang free into irradiated water. The concentration ratio was not modest. Sunflower root tissue pulled cesium-137 and strontium-90 from that water at levels higher than the surrounding liquid column. That is not a rounding error. Within 6 weeks, measurable radioactive contamination in the test sections of that pond dropped. The harvested biomass, dried, compressed, occupied a fraction of the volume of water it had cleaned. No pump, no filtration membrane, no chemical reagent. Simultaneously, field researchers across Belarus and Ukraine were running parallel trials with Brassica juncea on open agricultural ground, 150,000 square kilometers of it. Chernobyl exclusion zone. Those Belarus and Ukraine protocols established the operational framework still cited in peer-reviewed literature today. Sequential crop cycling, pH amendment between cycles, and controlled biomass handling post-harvest. Published outcomes, documented reductions. Here is the detail that stopped me. 2000 to looking at the geography here. The distances on this map matter. And years before any of this was named, Roman field managers were observing the identical mechanism, without cesium, without the biochemical vocabulary, without a laboratory. From the volcanic plains outside Rome northward through the Po Valley, Roman agronomists recorded that soils described as bitter and unproductive recovered after fallow cycles planted with wild mustard species. Po Valley, northern Italy. The mechanism operating beneath those Roman fields, glucosinolate hydrolysis, root exudate chelation, microbial population resetting, was identical to what Phytotech engineered on a floating platform in Ukraine in 1994. The physics does not care about the century. This knowledge persisted in empirical agricultural practice across 2 full millennia, passed through field observation, not laboratory publication, encoded in practice, not patent filings. Then, the 20th century's industrial supply chain arrived, and the fallow mustard cycle was replaced with a purchased input. Tell me in the comments whether your grandfather or great-grandfather ever planted a cover crop of mustard between his main growing seasons. Write it below. I want to know how far back this practice actually ran in your family's ground. The Chernobyl program was not folklore. It was pressure-tested field engineering executed under the most extreme contamination load ever imposed on a cultivated landscape. And it worked with nothing more than a root, water, and 6 weeks of time. The blueprint existed. The data was published. The barges floated. What comes next is the question the industry has spent 30 years making certain you never thought to ask. The question is not theoretical anymore. Here is the protocol. 6 steps. Total material cost, under $20. Executable alone from a standing position at age 60. Step 1. Site assessment. From a seated garden stool, press a standard trowel to 4-inch depth. Prioritize 3 zones within 3 feet of any pre-1978 structure, along the fence line bordering any street, and anywhere soil carries a darker color or an oily surface sheen. Those are your contamination gradients. Mark them. Step 2. pH. A colorimetric test kit costs $4 to $6 at any farm supply counter. Target 5.5 to 6.5. That ionic window is where heavy metal solubility peaks and plant uptake is maximum. Soil above pH 7.0 gets granular sulfur. 2 pounds per 100 square feet. Broadcast standing, 0 joint load. Below 5.5, agricultural lime at 5 pounds per 100 square feet. Step 3. Seed. Brassica juncea, the primary extraction species. 1 pound covers 500 square feet. Helianthus annus, the common non-hybrid sunflower, runs alongside it as secondary extractor and visual marker. Broadcast both across the amended zone. Then rake, a long handle rake. Upright posture, 2 inches of surface disturbance. That is all the seed contact this biology requires. What does the industry say about all of this? Nothing it wants you to hear. The EPA's own cost documents place excavation-based residential lead abatement at $250 to $500 per contaminated ton. A standard suburban abatement contract runs $15,000 to $40,000. Step 4. The growth cycle. Maintain soil moisture 2 inches down, firm and cool to the touch, but never pooling. Brassica juncea reaches the early flowering stage in 45 to 65 days, depending on ambient temperature. The harvest window is precise. First bud formation, before any petal opens. At that stage, shoot tissue holds its maximum heavy metal load. Step 5. Harvest. Long-handled bypass loppers. Cut at ground level, standing fully upright, no crouching, no knee flexion. Bundle the biomass. Do not compost it. The lead and cadmium are locked inside that tissue now. Bag it in contractor-grade plastic and dispose through municipal yard collection, or call your county extension office for designated biomass disposal guidance. The metal leaves your land in that bag. The Belarusian agricultural stations near Minsk ran sequential brassica cycling protocols on strontium-90 contaminated soils through the mid-1990s. The same 6-step logic, the same pH discipline, the same harvest timing. Minsk, Belarus. The data from those trials was published. The protocol transferred directly to every contaminated quarter acre in America. Step 6. Repetition. 2-week fallow after each harvest. Retest pH, re-amend, reseed. 3 to 4 sequential cycles across 2 growing seasons produce a measurable reduction in heavy metal concentration across the top 30 centimeters of your soil profile. Cycle 3. Lab test required. At the end of the 3rd cycle, send a sample to a certified analytical laboratory, $15 to $25 per sample. Compare it to your baseline. The numbers will have moved. Tell me in the comments, How much did your local contractor quote you for soil remediation on your property? Write the number. I want to see what the going rate is in your county, because that number is the price the industry has placed on knowledge it chose not to give you. The soil is recoverable. The protocol is physical and sequential. The total investment is the price of a seed packet. The only thing that was ever missing was the instruction. Now you have it. If you want the exact mechanical blueprints to calibrate the 70-degree drop test, the precise step-by-step physical protocols for the Spartan kinetic pendulum to move heavy loads with zero knee strain, and the gravity-assisted decompression postures you must execute after. Working the land to pull synovial fluid back into your L4 and L5 discs. We have compiled them all into our complete field guide, the joint-safe Homestead Mechanics. The direct link is in the description below. Keep your physical structure sovereign. The soil is clean. The body is next. What happens when the man who restored his land discovers his own skeletal architecture has been running the same silent contamination load for 40 years, and the fix costs exactly as much as the seed did? The extraction cycles have run. The beds are cleared. The cadmium is gone from the root zone. And now the camera turns, deliberately, without apology, to the operator. Here is the precise irony that closes this episode's arc. The human being who just decontaminated the land beneath a fence post is himself operating through a spinal column under chronic compressive loading, invisible, cumulative, and accelerating. In 1985, biomechanical researchers at the University of Michigan documented that Americans working desk-bound office roles accumulate an average compressive load of on the L4 intervertebral disc per hour of sitting, a figure that compounds across 4 decades of industrial employment. The same engineering logic that governed the phytoextraction protocol governs the skeletal restoration protocol. Identify the structural failure, apply a precise, low-cost physical intervention, measure the result, repeat the cycle. The 70-degree drop test requires nothing beyond a door frame and a 12-inch ruler. It maps asymmetrical load distribution across the hip and sacral platform, the mechanical precondition for chronic L4 and L5 compression. That has been operating silently in the background of every hour spent in a synthetic geometry chair since roughly 1960 industrial chair era. The Spartan kinetic pendulum, derived from ground-level work postures documented among subsistence farmers in the Peloponnese region. Of Greece, restores synovial fluid circulation inside compromised knee and hip joint capsules through controlled pendular limb loading. Executable in 8 minutes, against any fence post. Peloponnese, Greece. The gravity-assisted decompression postures for L4 and L5 use a firm floor, a low fence rail, or a concrete step, a $0 surface, to create intervertebral traction through controlled hip flexion angles. The mechanical principle is identical to inversion therapy. The equipment cost is nothing. The land is now biologically clean. The proximal renal tubules will not receive cadmium from a beet grown in reclaimed earth, but the operator's disc, compressed since the Reagan administration, is still waiting. The protocol costs exactly as much as the mustard did. If you want the exact mechanical blueprints, the precise calibration of the 70-degree drop test, and the full Spartan kinetic, pendulum protocols to move loads across reclaimed land with zero knee strain, we have compiled them into our complete field guide, the joint-safe Homestead Mechanics. The direct link is in the description below. Keep your physical structure sovereign. Tell me in the comments, did anyone in your family work a plot of land past the age of 70 without a doctor's help? What did they do differently with how they moved? I want the specific detail.